Representative Burgoyne.
Well, unfortunately, Medicaid is going to have to be cut in the near term over the next several years. And we have to be very wise about how we do the cutting. I know of a young man who was shot in the back in Pocatello by a bipolar individual who Health and Welfare cut his medications. He was out on the street living in the community doing fine until his medications were cut, and then he got a gun and he shot somebody. When we make cuts, we need to be sure that the ultimate bill of the taxpayer doesn't go up, it goes down. And that's very important. In this case, it went way up. And so when we make cuts, I'll give you an example. Right now, we're not allowed to reuse medical equipment. So wheelchairs for kids, they grow. When they're through with those wheelchairs, the Department of Health and Welfare isn't allowed under federal mandates to reuse them. And we need to work very closely with our congressmen and our senators and get Congress to allow us, give us the flexibility so that we can make intelligent cuts in the program so that we can do things like reuse medical equipment.
Okay, thank you. The next question goes to Representative Burgoyne. It's likely that a statewide ban on texting while driving could come before lawmakers next year. Do you support the ban, and do you believe that it is enforceable?
Yes on both counts, and a very strong yes. It was completely irresponsible of the House to defeat the ban on texting while driving. In fact, I would go a step further. I would be in favor of outlawing the use of a cell phone while driving. I have increasingly in my personal life taken to pulling over when I use a cell phone, and while I'm not perfect yet, I know that the law, if it were changed, would make me do that every single time. I would be a safer driver, and the people I'm on the road with would be safer drivers. The House, in defeating that texting ban, I said it in debate on the floor, I believe it to be true. People will die because that bill did not pass.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Perez.
I believe that it's already against the law under the inattentive driving laws that we have. There's a great deal of discretion with law enforcement, whether you're scolding a child in the back seat, speaking on a cell phone without both hands on the wheel, or texting, putting makeup on for that matter. All of these things are against the law. However, I think law enforcement has made a really good point in that if they write a ticket under that current law, the officer actually has to appear in court, and that puts a lot of additional strain on his time, on the court's time. So I think there's a proposal being made in this next legislative session that will create more of an infraction to where the officer can write the ticket and not have to further burden the courts, but there'd be a fine imposed. And I think that's an approach that may be satisfactory to all parties.
Okay, follow up on that. We'll go first to Mr. Perez. Like you said, there is a bill pending or being crafted right now by Representative Hagedorn out of Meridian. What do you feel is an appropriate penalty if that bill is passed? Do you think a fine should do it, or do you think that there needs to be jail time, probation? What do you think is an appropriate penalty for texting or using a cell phone while driving?
Well, I would look at, obviously a fine initially would be the best approach, and then the inattentive driving, the statute there, whatever the penalties are, I would think looked at mirroring those on second, third offenses. Initially, a fine.
Okay, Representative Burgoyne.
Well, I believe that a first offense where there is no accident, no property damage, no injury should be an infraction and would result in a fine. If there is an accident with property damage or an injury, I think it should be treated as a misdemeanor. And that is one of the problems that the legislature had this last session, was an argument over whether to treat the violation as an infraction or a misdemeanor. That was pretty well resolved. Unfortunately, the clock ran out on the session getting that resolved. But I think that texting while driving is a very serious issue. I think we all see it happening, and we need to stop it.
Okay, thank you. Next question goes first again to Republican Ralph Perez. Democratic gubernatorial candidate Keith Allred has advocated, and we've already discussed it tonight, but for fully funding the tax commission. They're short 29 positions. It would take a good deal of money to do that. But he believes that the money they collect would ultimately benefit the state. Do you support Allred's plan, even if it means digging into another department's budget to fully staff the Idaho State Tax Commission?
I'd like to see the plan in full. I do support the concept of fully employing the tax commission so that they can go out there and collect those taxes. However, when you say take money away from another department, what you're seeming to put forward is that it would cost more to do it than it would in collections, so we would have to make up that shortfall. And when you say what other department, you're talking about education. So if education is going to be the decision whether we fund education or whether we fund that department, I'm going to come down on the side of education, and I would have to say no. But I want to see what the proposal is, what the estimates for revenue generation are and the costs are, and I just don't have those numbers to give a full answer, but that would be the principle that would drive it.
Okay, Representative Burgoyne.
Well, we have done this twice before, invested in additional auditors at the Tax Commission, and in both cases it was very profitable. It would be profitable again. So we have the track record. We know that it works. I would say that if it was necessary initially to cut in other departments, that's something we would have to do. But I think the overall net effect would be positive and quite positive. To the extent that there are things that we could cut, they aren't just necessarily education. And let me give you an example. I intend to introduce legislation, if I'm reelected, to sell the governor's mansion. Last several governors haven't lived in that mansion. It costs us quite a bit of money every year. There's $1 million in our money in an endowment for it that's going to run out in about 5 years. There are better ways to use that money, and one of them would be to hire tax auditors.
Okay, that's the first person in the state that I've heard call for that. So I give you points for being innovative, I suppose, but points don't count here. So thank you for your response. The question goes to you again, Representative Burgoyne. Keith Allred has also said that we need a thorough review of all sales tax exemptions offered by the state. I believe there's 129 of them. Do you support that plan, and do you support closing a few of them to raise revenues?
Well, I supported and in fact sponsored legislation to study tax exemptions on the sales tax. And that bill, unfortunately, did not get a hearing by the chairman of the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. But we do need to study these. We need to have a citizen commission made up of regular citizens and industry experts who will study the effects on the economy and the effects on regular Idahoans. I favor the study. I can't tell you whether any exemptions ought to be eliminated or not, but we ought to be very careful about how we do it. We want to be sure if we do it that it's going to help us spur economic growth in Idaho, not hinder economic growth. It's very important we get the tax rate on the sales tax down. It was 3% when enacted. I think that we would do well to have a 4% sales tax and maybe expand this tax across some of those exemptions depending on what the study shows.
All right, Mr. Perez.
I would welcome a study. I've looked at some of these, and like I say, unless you get into services, health and medical services, prescription and medical devices, there's just not the big numbers there to make a big difference in the budget and the harm that can be done by. Let me give you an example. If we were to charge sales taxes, for example, on equipment for aircrafts, people wouldn't bring their aircraft here to have it repaired because they can fly just as easily to another city in our region where they don't charge that sales tax, and then our state doesn't collect the sales tax anyway, but we lose the revenue and we lose the jobs from the economic development that would occur if that plane had come here. So it's a very complex, and I would agree with Mr. Burgoyne that it's a complex situation. I would be more than happy to review it, but I'm very reluctant to raise anybody's taxes.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Mr. Perez, this question again goes to you first. The economy, of course, is a major concern for all Idahoans. The unemployment rate for the state sits right around 8.7%. If elected, what would you do in the Idaho legislature to boost the economy of the Gem State?
Well, one plan that I've got is to try to give incentives for employers to hire. But I take a more of a revenue neutral approach than was proposed in the last legislature. I don't know who had proposed it,